All right, welcome to Math 60. Today we're going to talk about fractions. So we have these notes here. Let's talk about multiplying fractions. If I were going to take half of a half, well, if I have a diagram, this is very similar to what you might have already watched about this, but if I have half, right there, that's half. What if I take half of that half? What do I get? 1/4. So half of a half, and the word of usually means multiply, equals 1/4. Well, what did I do with those two fractions to get 1/4? I multiplied across. So when we multiply fractions, we can multiply across. We get here 1/4. Here, if I were to multiply across, what would I get? 3/15, right? But that's not simplified. So we always, with fractions, you always want to simplify. Simplify is the same thing as reduce. Okay? What number goes into 3 and 15 evenly? 3. So if I divide the top by 3 and I divide the bottom by 3, I get what? 1/5. Now, if you look across, you can cross cancel. 3 goes into 3 one time. So this is what we call cross cancel. And that's because 3/3 is the same thing as what? 1. So essentially when I'm cross canceling those, I'm getting rid of common factors that I would end up reducing out of. Okay? How do I multiply a whole number and a fraction? What do I have to make sure I do? Yeah, because all whole numbers have a denominator of 1. Now, you're all whole human beings. You're one human being, right? When you go outside in the sun today, you're going to look down on the ground and you'll see your denominator of 1. It's usually invisible. It's your shadow. Okay, that was like kind of a dumb joke. But anyway, the point is here you have always a denominator of 1. You can always make a fraction into a whole number into a fraction. Is it the same thing as 2/0? What is 2/0? It's actually undefined, right? Because we cannot undefined. We can't divide by 0. We were talking about that the other day, dividing by 0, okay? So all whole numbers have a denominator of 1. Can you cross cancel here? Because you would get 2/8, and that would reduce down to what? 1/4, because we take half of each. 2, you see these are across. To cross cancel, we would go 2 goes in here once, 2 goes in here 4 times, and then if you cross cancel, you get the answer much faster. For dividing fractions, we're going to divide, dividing by 2 is the same as multiplying by 1/2. That's multiplying by the reciprocal, or people sometimes call it the reflippical. Do you see why I said that's the reflippical? Because it flips. That's how we find the reciprocal. So here we would have -3/4 times 2/3. We take the reciprocal of the second fraction. Because dividing by 2 is the same thing as multiplying by 1/2. If I said, what is 8 divided by 2? Does everybody know? 4. Well, what is 1/2 of 8? Also 4. This is the same thing. When I divide by a number, I'm multiplying by its reciprocal. So that's why we take the reciprocal here. Can anything cross cancel? 2 and 4 becomes 1 and 2. The 3's become 1 and 1. And we have -1/2. Good, -1/2. Here, this is a lot of numbers going on, but let's just go ahead and make it a multiplication. So we have 11/16 times what? This is reciprocal of this fraction. Yeah, -16/9. Now, can anything cross cancel there? The 16's become 1 and 1, so we get -11/9. Very good. Now, adding and subtracting. What do we have to make sure that we have in order to add and subtract? Common denominator. How come we need a common denominator? Yes. least common denominator. Is that right? Denominator. What's the common denominator between 1/2 and 2/3? So the LCD is going to be 6. How do I make 1/2 have a fraction denominator of 6? What do I have to do to it? 3/3, right? Because that's the same thing as multiplying it by 1. So I'm making equivalent fractions. I'm not changing the value. What do I have to do to the second fraction to make it have a denominator of 6? Multiply by 2/2. Good. So we get 3/6 plus 4/6 is equal to 7/6, or 1 1/6. I'm fine with improper fractions so long as they're reduced. Okay, now what about the next one? These already have denominators that are the same. Why do we need a common denominator anyway? Does anyone know why? Is it just the rules? Okay, think about that for a minute. And then what do we get here? Is that 11/11? 11/11ths, which reduces down to what? Reduces to 1. So the reason why we need common denominators is we need the fractions to be the same size. I didn't bring my fraction strips with me, I don't think, but in some other videos I have on YouTube, I show the fraction strips and what the fractions look like. That can be really helpful. So if you're stuck on fractions, you might look for those or ask me. What's the common denominator, lowest common denominator for these two fractions? 8. So what do I don't need to change this one. This becomes -3/8. And then negative becomes a positive. What do I need to multiply this one by? 4/4, because 4/4 is the same thing as 1. So we get plus 4/8. Does anybody have an answer for this one? 1/8. Can I reduce 1/8? It's already reduced. Okay. What about here? What's the lowest common denominator between 8 and 3? 24. How did you get 24 anyway? Yeah, you can do that. That's one way. So we're going to multiply this fraction by what? 3/3, and this one by 8/8. And so we get 9/24 minus 8/24, which is equal to 1/24. Excellent. Okay. Let's talk about perimeter. Now, it's always important when we're talking about geometry to draw a picture. So, perimeter. What does the word perimeter even mean? Yes, the distance around the outside. So, a rectangle is 1/5 of a mile. A rectangular yard is 1/5 of a mile by 1/2 of a mile. And actually, I kind of did a bad job with my drawing because which side should be actually shorter? I gave it away. Yeah. So it's not drawn to scale. How long is the perimeter? Practice with fractions, but then you can use decimals to check, okay? So if this is 1/5, that means this is 1/5. Now I would actually always put the dimensions on both sides, because that's what a lot of times, you know what half of the people who get the perimeter wrong, they miss? The most common mistake with perimeter is what? Do you know? They only add 2 of the sides, because when we say that this side and this side are equal and this side and this side are equal, a lot of times people will only see the labels on 2 of the sides, so they'll only add 2 sides. We have to double it, right? I have 2 1/5s. How many 1/2s do I have? I have 2 1/2s. And then here I have 2/5, right? Plus, what's this? One. So I actually have 1 2/5. 1 2/5, you could say. 1 2/5, or this would be the same thing. If I wanted to add them and make them an improper fraction, what is 1 equal to with a denominator of 5? 2/5 plus 5/5. 5/5 is the same thing as 1 whole. Gives us 7/5. Either way. Now, we discovered on web work, we will not get full credit for this answer because why? What am I missing? my units. So anytime we have some geometry, we're going to have some units. So we're going to put the units on there. Okay, any questions on any of this fraction stuff before we go on to the next thing?